Welcome to Milk Market Tidbit for the June Federal Milk Marketing Order data that the USDA released this week. This is Dr. Lawrence Jones, and I'm recording this on Wednesday, July the 16th. Now, just kind of remember, this is the first report where everything in the report is under the new federal milk marketing rules. And so it's just taking a little bit of time, not only for me to get my data in line, but I think even USDA a little bit. All right, so here's the big overview. The statistical uniform prices weighted for different regions was 1955. That was up a fair amount. Class 3 looked like it left the orders a little bit with more depooling, and that was actually a bit of a question mark for me. I wasn't quite sure why the orders were doing that. But month over month, milk was clearly down. Part of that's because of that depooling, but also production looks like it's down. And fat came down about 4 ticks, with the summertime here. The statistical uniform prices was 1955, as I said, and last month was 1903. So that was a 52-cent change. Now our highest was Florida at 22.94, and the lowest looks like it was the Northwest at 18.88. And part of the issue is once you kind of draw a line in the middle, the class 1 differentials are much higher in the east than in the west. And so part of the reason that the west was a little bit lower was those new class 1 differentials. We'll look at the change. Now, as I said, there was some depooling it looked like, but I'm not sure why there was. There's only about 52 cents of difference between 3 and 4, so there was not a good reason to actually depool. Class 1 was down the most at $1.11. We ended up with the biggest negative change here in Arizona, but we knew Arizona was really going to get hammered because their differentials only increased a little bit. And their highest is actually the Mid-Atlantic was up almost $1. One of the things I try to figure out from the federal marketing data is, what's going to happen to milk production in the next USDA report. A lot of the regions are in red. Now there are some that are in green, and that would have been California, Minnesota, Wisconsin, order 33. But overall, milk was at about 97%. If we look at the Northeast, which is kind of always my bellwether, is about 98% of last month. But the one that was really a shocker was class 2, because it was up significantly. So a lot of class 2 came back into the order. So here's a graph of all the different class utilizations. Overall, milk production came down, as we said. Class 3 came down. Class 1 was down a little bit. Class 4 was actually down a little bit also, and Class 2 was up the most. Now, historically, when we look at June, USDA comes in just about 99% of month over month. Now, last year we were about 98, so a little bit lower. So my guess right now is it's going to be pretty close to that 99% again, plus or minus 0.5%, and the deviations are generally pretty close to that. So that puts us at about 19 billion pounds of milk, and that will be an increase year over year of 2.5%. As we can see in class 3, we had this continued decrease here, and I think more class 3 was depooled. It's kind of the only way I can sort this out. But we're at 56% of what our maximum was, and we expect more cheese plants on at this point. So I was expecting this eventually, when we quit depooling, to be much, much higher. And as soon as class 4 is higher than class 3, this won't be depooled anymore. So our class 1 utilizations came down a little bit. We were about 26 last month, and we're about 25. Of course, the highest class 1 utilization is always the southeast, and then the lowest is always like Minnesota, Wisconsin. They're almost exclusively class 3. So this is looking at the class 3 utilizations as well as the change. As I said, class 3 in Minnesota, Wisconsin is 77. And the areas that really seemed to depool was Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Most of the other regions didn't depool very much, but again, these areas seem to depool a very high percentage of their class 3. Because again, Arizona was down to 3.6, so they went from like a 29 down to 3.6. So again, almost all of their class 3 came out. Now we look at class 4. There was not a lot of changes. And our highest utilization is California, again, very high class 4. They're about 51. They dropped about 4 ticks, so from 55 down to 51. But again, not a major change. So these fat values dropped about 4 ticks. We're down to 416. The highest actually was Minnesota, Wisconsin, and tied with Texas, with those which the Northwest didn't take the high spot this month. They're a little bit lower. And of course, our lowest is Florida at 3.78 with all the heat that's down there right now. Protein values were 335 for Texas. So Texas had very good components this month. And low was always the Northeast at 319. And not far behind is order 33 at 320. So this week we had the global dairy trade, which actually was up for everything but cheddar, and that was actually down. We're going to have the National Dairy Sales Report today. And next week we start getting more of the reports. And so it'll be the milk production report on next Tuesday, which will be our next milk market tidbit.